With immigration centers on our southern border overflowing with people seeking asylum and thousands more attempting to enter the country illegally every day, we decided to devote our in-depth segment this week to the question of how the elimination of Title 42 might impact Oklahoma. Here's moderator Reese Wetzel and his special panel of guests.
Thank you, Rich. And today we are joined by three guests who can give us more information on Title 42 and the situation going on at the south border of the United States. Joining us today, we have reporter with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, Gabriela Ramirez Perez. Joining us also is Senior Director of Immigration and Refugee Services at the YWCA Tulsa, Molly Bryant. And joining us is Sheriff Chris West, and he is the Sheriff of Canadian County. Thank you all for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Gabriela, I want to start off with you here. It's been a week since Title 42 was lifted. How would you describe the situation at the southern border based off of just some sources that you've talked to? And what is Title 42? Can you give us a brief rundown of that history?
Right. So Title 42 was put in place by the Trump administration in March 2020 under the Public Health Authority, and basically stipulated that any migrants who arrive at the border without documentation would be expelled due to concerns of spreading COVID-19. The Title 42 used its authority to override U.S. law that allows any non-citizen, regardless of immigration status or how they entered the country, to seek asylum. During the time it was in place, this resulted in the majority of migrants being expelled immediately after being apprehended. But since Title 42 was a public health rule, there were no consequences to future immigration applications, and so there was an increase in repeated attempts to cross the border. These rates of repeated attempts are part of the reason for the high number of border expulsions by the Border Patrol since its implementation. But now that Title 42 has been lifted, it appears that the situation is changing. In the days before the rule was lifted last Thursday, there was a surge of migrants at the border, and many expected an additional increase in migrants trying to come to the U.S. after the end of Title 42. However, the situation on the ground has indicated otherwise. In the days after the rule expired, Border Patrol has seen a 50% drop in the number of migrants crossing the border, which is a significant decrease to the situation from just a few days earlier. It's still too early to tell what the long-term effect will be and how the new rules will change the situation at the border. So it's definitely something we have to keep an eye on.
Well, that brings me here to Sheriff West. Let's talk about Title 42 from your perspective. Do you agree with Gabriela that maybe we're not seeing the increase that we thought was going to happen when Title 42 was lifted? And are you concerned about the influx of immigrants here illegally or seeking asylum now that this is lifted?
I'm actually on a border security committee with the National Sheriff's Association. I've been down to the border multiple times since 2019. I was actually down in Sierra Vista, Arizona in September at a border security meeting. And then in February, I was in Washington, D.C. with a group. And then just last month, I was in McAllen, Texas, and was down on the Rio Grande with Border Patrol, some Texas sheriffs, and the Texas Department of Public Safety. So I've got extensive knowledge, connections, and I've been down there multiple times. So Sheriff Mark Daniels is the sheriff of Cochise County, Arizona. He's the border committee chair, and we communicate regularly. So we as sheriffs or public safety officials, we consider this thing to basically be a three-column concern. Number one, public safety. Number two, national security, and number three, humanitarian crisis that we're dealing with. So, even if the numbers are 50% of what they were last week, it's still out of control. The border's not secure. We have people that are losing their lives in the desert. We still have the cartels that are taking advantage of the loopholes that we have. And so this is still a crisis as far as public safety and sheriffs, the national sheriffs, and law enforcement is concerned. We believe that we have adequate laws on the books. The issue is it's policy driven, and the administration just doesn't want to follow the rule of law. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
All right, Molly, I want to talk to you now. Are we seeing an increase in immigrants coming to Oklahoma City and Tulsa? And what is the process like for them once they arrive?
Yeah, for sure. We continue to see immigrant populations grow in both our more rural or our more urban areas like Tulsa and Oklahoma City, but also in more rural places like Guymon. This increase is pretty steady, and it's not in connection with Title 42. Again, like Gabby mentioned, Title 42 just expired last week, so we're not really seeing anything happening quite yet. We have had a significant increase of refugees who are being resettled in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. That's a number that is set by our state government. But I think going back to Sheriff West's discussion around the border, I mean, I think we're talking about Title 42 and seeking asylum. So I think when we're talking about the border, we don't want to conflate people who are arriving unauthorized with people who are seeking asylum, because that is their legal right. They have a legal right to apply for asylum in the United States, and they have a right to be in the United States while their cases are being heard. So this is the law. This is not an abuse of the immigration system. This hasn't changed based on policies between either administration. This continues to be the U.S. immigration law. This is defined by the Refugee Act of 1980, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14. So I think that we want to make sure when we're talking about Title 42 that we're talking about folks who are seeking asylum, because that is the policy.
So
and it is not about other forms of access to the U.S.
So Title 42 relates directly to asylum seekers, not necessarily people crossing illegally.
Correct. There is no correlation between Title 42 and people crossing unauthorized or for any other way. So when we talk about Title 42, we really need to be focusing on our asylum laws and people who are seeking asylum.
Sheriff West, do you want to add to that? What was your thought on Title 42? And when you saw it was getting lifted, what was your reaction?
So again, I understand exactly what Molly is saying, but what law enforcement, public safety is concerned is the vetting occurring that needs to occur. We also have reason to believe that a lot of these people have just been schooled on what they need to say once they come across the border, and once they're going through the process centers, is they just have to claim asylum. Our concern is that there's a serious risk that it's being abused, and that we have people entering the United States that basically could pose a threat to our citizens.
And we're talking about, go
I'd
ahead.
love to respond to that, actually.
Go for it.
I think saying that people can enter the U.S. and just claim asylum and then go about the process, I think is really simplifying the actual complications of seeking asylum, and the Border Patrol and USCIS that are in charge of vetting people, right? I don't know if you've ever been a part of the application process for those who are seeking asylum, but I also was on the border in Matamoros in 2019 working with folks who are actually seeking asylum. And that process is incredibly complicated. You have to not only have your story of seeking asylum, but you also have to have evidence, which is incredibly difficult for people who have escaped violence and aren't really necessarily, when escaping violence, thinking, what documentation do I need? So again, I think it's an oversimplification and just a lack of, for me, watching the process firsthand, I've seen how complicated and difficult it is for folks to actually request asylum. Also, it is, again, the law. It is the law for people to be able to request and seek asylum. So I think, again, maybe the focus should be on something separate. But if this is the law, people have the legal right to go to the border, present themselves, and seek asylum.
Well, Gabriella, I want to turn to you now. We're talking about asylum seekers, but there was some changes to the rules that the Biden administration put in for these asylum seekers and made it a little more difficult almost. And some of these policies and rules were actually introduced by the Trump administration and were overruled in courts. Can you tell us a little bit about these changes to the asylum seeking policies?
Yes. So a day before the end of Title 42, the Biden administration released new federal regulations that have now replaced the public health rule. These rules largely restrict asylum access and eligibility in the United States by imposing new restrictions on eligibility with very limited exceptions and overall aim to deter people from coming. Like Molly said, if the standards were high before, they're even higher now. This new rule is called the Circumvention of Lawful Pathways, and it creates a higher bar for asylum claims. And now, to claim asylum, migrants have to have applied for asylum in another country en route to the US and have been denied. Additionally, migrants who are waiting at the border and want to claim asylum have to make an appointment beforehand with an app called CBP-1. However, the app has been reported to glitch and has a limited amount of appointments per day, right now around 1,000. But if they can secure an appointment, present themselves at a port of entry, then migrants are given a date to appear at an immigration court and apply for asylum, which is simply the first step in a long process.
Okay, so Sheriff West, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to mention that those that don't meet this criteria may be forced to cross unlawfully. And if they're apprehended, then they will most likely be deported and barred from entering the country again for 5 years.
Okay, Sheriff West, that brings up a good point. We're talking about when you arrest someone who's an illegal immigrant, what's that process like to arresting them, to notifying the federal government, and then deportation?
Yeah, so I actually participate with a program called 287G. So I have a couple of my detention officers in our jail facility here in El Reno that has been to ICE training. They actually have credentials. So when we have non-citizens that are booked into our county jail, basically those detention officers that have the training do an assessment. And what we're really looking for is people that could be criminal aliens. And then we hook up with ICE, and then ICE does their thing to determine whether or not these individuals are going to be deported or not. But as far as the boots on the ground, the law enforcement officers that are on the streets when we run across them, I've been in law enforcement for 40 years, so I mean a lot has changed since I've been in the game. Today, it's almost, I mean, it's extremely difficult when we run across, even to get an ICE agent, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to respond. To come. And then because, again, like I said, because of administration policies, it's not like it was, in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, where an agent comes out and takes custody, and then they work on deportation. So it's a lot more difficult today. I would say the overwhelming vast majority are just released.
And when you say released, you mean released back to their country, or just released out of the holding?
Just released at the holding, right?
Okay. Molly, I want to go back to you here. What's the process to make sure that you're doing this legally, and what does YWCA offer to help that process?
Yeah, so those who are seeking asylum, again, very separate than arresting someone who is here, who has committed a crime and then is also unauthorized to be in the United States. So at the YWCA, we assist immigrants from all backgrounds. So all languages, statuses, personalities, everything. We provide educational classes, both for adults and youth. We do youth mentoring for Afghan teens and young adults. We provide interpretation translation services, legal services, case management, housing, all kinds of things in order to support all kinds of newcomers in our community. For people who are seeking asylum, again, you can seek asylum at any port of entry in the United States, whether that's the southern border, Florida, Canada, doesn't matter. And you present yourself, and you are speaking and going through a pretty, I would say, a very extensive interview process. People are waiting years and years for this process to complete. They are not eligible for any type of government assistance during this process. So they're not eligible for food stamps, for WIC, for Medicare or Medicaid, and they're not legally allowed to work for often over several years. So it's a really difficult thing for those of us at the YWCA. We do everything we can to support people to survive in the United States during their asylum process. But again, there's not a lot of support systems in place, at least governmental, that will support asylum seekers during this very long, often torturous process of seeking asylum.
And just real quick, you said that you haven't seen an influx yet of people due to the Title 42 lifting. Are you guys anticipating that to happen at all?
I mean, I don't think that, we're not scared of it. We're pretty excited, actually. Like, we are experts on welcoming newcomers to our community. And so I can say, as someone who is boots on the ground, working with immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers every day, all day, that Okies are prepared. They are excited. They have continued to be incredibly welcoming and gracious to newcomers in our communities. And so I think if we see an increase in folks arriving from the border because of Title 42, again, we're prepared. We've been creating infrastructure for years to be able to support folks. And we have incredible relationships with people in the community.
And we're running short on time here, but I'm going to go ahead and ask two more questions. I'm going to break the rules a little bit here. Sheriff West, I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
I've actually got a couple of property owners that live in my county that have kind of taken some Afghan refugees under their arms. and they had become victims of crime where they had been placed. And so he had kind of befriended this group, and he was looking to get them moved over into Canadian County into some of his rental properties so that he could kind of look after them. So I think it was a good point that she made out that a lot of these people are taken advantage of and become victims. That's sad to say about some of the people that are American citizens that are exploiting these individuals. And so that's obviously something that was passed on to the police department to issue, to address. But you know, I'm all for, and I think you're going to find out that most law enforcement, we're all for legal immigration and whatever we can do to get people that can come, that can assimilate into our system, that can be contributors. However, one of the things that we are discussed about is resources that are going to be available. But no, those were some really good points that Molly made.
Okay. And Gabriella, I'm going to let you get the last word here. Anything you would like to add to this conversation?
I would just like to uplift that, you know, immigrants and immigration have just such a positive impact in our state, you know, in building a home for themselves and their families. Immigrants, regardless of their immigration status, create the very foundations of our economy and our communities. You know, immigrants are entrepreneurs. In 2019, their businesses generated almost $700 million in revenue. They pay taxes regardless of immigration status. And again, in 2019, immigrant-led households paid $1.9 billion in federal, state, and local taxes, money that helps fund our schools and critical infrastructure. You know, as amazing as these contributions are, Oklahoma can strengthen our state and bolster these contributions even more by passing forward-looking and inclusive policies that, you know, benefit us all. What happens at the border and around immigration is difficult to influence, but at the state level, Oklahoma can take meaningful action to embrace and integrate our immigrant community.
Well, thank you for that. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us. We have Sheriff Chris West here out of Canadian County, Gabriella Ramirez Perez, reporter with the Oklahoma Policy Institute, and Molly Bryant, Senior Director of Immigration and Refugee Services at the YWCA Tulsa. Thank you all for joining us and participating.
Thank you so much.